Been a director of Lives Through Friends for I don't know how many years now.
I don't know either, it's a long time.
Sounds it's over 10 anyway.
Yeah, it's over 10. I know that we weren't going very long before Colin said,
Yeah.
should we ask Lassie?
Yeah. And always felt there's a sort of perfect marriage, my background in community development, and we shared a lot of interest in it, haven't we, Paul? I've been active in community work for over 40 years now, a lot of it in Gloucestershire and then around the country. And what we thought we'd do was start with some practical ways of how you get about creating people-powered change, from some practical examples of Chris's work in the Forest of Dean. And then I can share what over the last 40 years maybe we've learnt from doing it elsewhere, and I'm sure what it is, it's very, very similar. Do you want to just introduce your background?
Yeah, no worries, and then we're going into my bit, yeah?
Do you want to do it that way?
Yeah. Cool. Right. So, I think I've spoken to all of you. I've definitely emailed all of you anyway. So Chris, I've been a Lives Through Friends director for not 10 years, 2 years I think, probably about that, something like that. But I've known Bob for many more years. I'm the CEO of a charity in the Forest of Dean, and I'm also a counsellor in the political sense, which I'm going to talk to you more about in a bit, although you do very well to see that. It wasn't so bad in the session just now, was it?
No,
but I think the sun has moved.
Through, yeah.
So I've always lived and majority worked in an area called the Forest of Dean, which again you do well to see, but it's depicted there, part of Gloucestershire, only about 40 minutes from here. And when I grew up, for some strange reason, I always wanted to be a teacher. And I've always had a real close sense of community. My family are from the area, they knew everybody, we knew everyone on our street, you know, you knew your doctors and your dentists, you'd pass each other and all that sort of stuff. It was all quite lovely. Then I went to university, funny enough, just up the road from here in Cheltenham, and I started my teaching degree. And I got towards the end of it and I was like, shit, this isn't what I thought teaching was. I was on my placements and it wasn't about people at all. It wasn't about giving people better lives and finding out what matters to them and giving them the best life in their image. It was around Ofsted, it was around targets, it was around how many boxes you can tick with the people you talk to. So I was like, that's not what I want to do. So I was really lucky because I volunteered all my life. I've been an under-8s football coach, volunteered for an arts charity and various other bits in between. And I got a job of a place called the Children's Opportunity Centre in a place called Colford, and it's an inclusive children's centre. Some children who have disabilities and some children that don't, and it was just an amazing place. And it was all around, there were no expectations other than what mattered to the people that we worked with, and it was just incredible. Loved it, an amazing place to be and a place to work. I then went on for my sins to work for a big beast of a charity that I'm sure all of you will be aware of, whether you're from the UK or not, called Bernardo's. And that took me back to all the things I hated about about teaching. It was valuing people on the basis of their deficits and the things that are wrong with them. So if you had a conversation with somebody, you would need to go and record afterwards and say, oh, were they a smoker? You know, were they a drinker? Do they breastfeed? Are they single parents? Because you get more points if you did. And I just became really disillusioned. And the picture of community that I was then led to believe that was the Forest of Dean was completely different to what I knew the Forest of Dean was. So I then came and worked at an organisation with Bob, and I have done ever since, called Forest Voluntary Action Forum, or FVAF. It's a bit of a mouthful, whichever way you say it. But what I found really interesting is this here is what I heard people talking about when they referred to the Forest of Dean. So governments and local authorities would call the Forest of Dean a high level of deprivation. They'd say we had low educational attainment. They would say we're lacking in aspiration, that we're isolated, we're lacking in diversity, got a lower than average life expectancy, we got greater levels of tooth decay, it might be true, we've got low economic output, and some might even say we're backward and old-fashioned. So, but this didn't reflect what I knew growing up in the communities that I belonged to, but this is what professionals were saying that the place I lived was. And I found this fantastic map, well, whichever way you see it, but this map on Google Images that somebody drew of Gloucestershire. And it's, you've got, in Cheltenham, you've got the Roman sort of like places, you've got the beautiful, images in the Cotswolds and all this lovely stuff in the rest of Gloucestershire. And then you go to the Forest of Dean and you've got leaves. That's it. It's got leaves. And I think there's a tiny little pig there. And it's like, wow, that is people's perception of the area that I live in. And I became more and more aware that actually funding and investment was on the basis of this. Yeah. All those deficits, not on the basis of what I knew about the Forest of Dean, that it's resilient and resourceful. In the absence of investment, we've been more resourceful, we've shared, we've had to. When the mines closed, there wasn't people jumping in to offer us new employment, we had to make it for ourselves. Pride in place. People are really proud of where they lived, and how long they've lived there. Rich heritage and culture, that they're connected to nature. I'm really proud to say we've got a green council now for the first time. Local enterprise. So you'll never see a KFC, a McDonald's, a Burger King, a Costa, any of that in the Forest of Dean. You never will. But what you will see is loads of local enterprise, small start-up businesses. We've got a traditional sense of communities in that people know each other, people talk to each other. We're seen as independent. Now we're seen as independent as a place on the periphery of the country, the periphery of the county. But I'd like to think is an area where we're interdependent, because that's the goal we'll all aim for. And I think we saw that particularly during the pandemic, where places like the Forest of Dean were quick to mobilise, and you had neighbourhood groups supporting each other, where the cities, for example, were waiting for services to do it for them. And then you've got a warm hospitality. So if you walk down the street, every other person that you see will likely say hello to you, or know you, even better. So these are very different pictures. Obisto but, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Local dialect.
Obist. So Obist means how are you? And we've just opened up our new community sort of centre, if you like, and we've called it Obist, which is a nod to Forest dialect. So they're very different, and we have to navigate in a world where that dictates funding, but we work in that way, and it's really, really, really difficult. And I think these are 4 really tangible examples of the way that government is impacted negatively on the communities that I grew up in. So the first one, if you can see it, you do well, is a picture of a pub. Now that is one of the best community hubs and community spaces that you will find. We've had 50 of those close in the Forest of Dean over the last decade or so. And in large part, not entirely, but in large part because of the impact of taxation that is discriminated against those buildings and the people who run them. So the closure of those has essentially been the closure of 50, in my mind, community hubs and community spaces. We've got a swimming pool, aren't we lucky? So that swimming pool was fought for by my dad and my dad's dad, who lived in an area called Hildene, and it's the most deprived of the most deprived areas in the Forest of Dean. And there's no government, there's no funding that was jumping and saying, oh, we're going to build them a leisure centre because we really care about those people. That wasn't the case at all. They wanted a swimming pool because they wanted a bloody swimming pool, and that's fine. So what they did is they fundraised and fundraised for years and years and years, and eventually that community got enough money to build that swimming pool. And it's amazing. Had ownership of it, and what happened is, I think 2 decades later, that pool was then gifted to the local authority, and then that was given out as a contract to a private organisation, which is now called Freedom Leisure. Now that swimming pool is on the brink of closure now because they can't afford to run it. Now what a great example of something that's created by community, owned by community, that has been deconstructed by government and the local authority. I'm then going to fast forward over to this one here, and Bob will know this one very well. So this is our community hospital in the Forest of Dean. It's 100 years old, it was built before the NHS, and it was built by the contributions of the miners in the Forest of Dean. So
Still.
it's called the Dilk, yeah. So there was nobody that was going to build a hospital for us, despite the fact accidents were happening all the time down the mines that were causing people to be killed or injured or whatnot. So the miners came together and they paid for that building to be built. Decades later, that building was gifted to the NHS. Guess what's happening now? It's closing down. It is closing down. And they're replacing it with a new hospital with half as many beds.
They're not just closing one,
They're closing 2 hospitals, yeah. So again, an example of something that's created by the community, for the community, because it matters to the community, that has been deconstructed by the government and the NHS. And then this last one is an example that's really close to my heart, because I worked on it. So there is a lunch club that operated in the town I live in, called Cinderford. And it's been going for 27, 28 years. It was really historically a big, vibrant lunch club, and for many people it was the only social interaction they had in a week. Now I went along because I heard that they were struggling, and I went along and I saw 50 people go into this lunch club, and you thought, how is this struggling? There's 50 people coming every single week. But those 50 people weren't helping. They weren't putting their chairs away, they weren't baking cakes, they weren't paying for the room hire, they weren't doing anything to contribute. They were consuming it as an activity. And the reason being, through talking to those people, the reason they were there is because they've been referred there. They've been referred there largely by something called social prescribing, because they saw this social activity as a benefit to their health and well-being. I get it, it's true, it does. But it isn't community. So suddenly, you brought a bunch of people into a space that was run by local people, and they said, I'll take that, fix me. To the point of which I was going round and I was helping out, and there are people clicking their fingers for you to make them teas and coffees and give them bingo tickets. So the culture changed dramatically to the point that lunch club closed, despite the fact 50 people were going every week because nobody would run it. And that is what we're seeing. Community activity is being valued now by governments, by local authorities and institutions, but not in the way in which community operates. And it's turning it into something quite different and quite damaging.
Was the same one last because of were they all being gifted because no one would run them like the hospital?
As in the buildings?
Yeah,
I think it's seen as the thing, almost like the default thing to do. If you've got a building, it must be safer with the NHS, it must be safer with a private organisation or whatnot. And even sometimes I convince myself of that, but it's not. It's clearly not. There's some examples that show that that's not the case. So the organisation that I work for is all about resisting that, all about fighting back and influencing change. So one way we do that is through volunteering. So we support over 1,000 people. We don't count the numbers because we don't particularly care about numbers, but we know it's in excess of 1,000 people every year that we support to volunteer in one way or another in the Forest of Dean. We also make sure that they do it in a way that's really meaningful for them. So it's not a case of, oh, I need to volunteer because my job coach has told me that I need to volunteer. It's something that's meaningful, that matters, that utilises their skills, assets and passions. We also help around crisis support, which we had to do during the COVID-19 pandemic, but we didn't have to do it anywhere near as much as they needed in Gloucester, where they didn't have an organisation like ours and communities like ours. We then provide some real specific levels of community support. So one example is around community projects, of which we facilitate many. So all of our community projects come from the conversations and the relationships that we have with the people that we meet from day to day. We have several community builders that go out to various hubs, talk to people and find out what their passions are, what they care about, and if appropriate, we help them turn them into fantastic projects. And the one that I usually talk about is the one that I first got involved in when I went to the VAF. And it's a project that the community called Walking with Wheels. So we went out and we had lots of conversations with a wide variety of people that included people from care homes, older people, younger people, people with disabilities. And we found out that the thing people loved most about living in the Forest of Dean is the fact they lived in a really unique landscape with amazing woodlands and trails that they could go out in. The sad reality is there was a big portion of the population that couldn't go out in it because it wasn't accessible to them. So we spoke to some people that talked about their love for the forest, but had never been in it, not once. And then we talked to some people who had been in the Forest of Dean, but not for the last 20 years because of some sort of physical disability. So we got them all together and we said, well, what can we do about this? And we came up with the joint idea of getting these all-terrain mobility scooters. And we got funding for them because that's one of the things that we're pretty good at. So we got funding for these all-terrain mobility scooters and we put them around various locations in the Forest of Dean free to hire. 7 years on, it's still going, it's run by the community, and hundreds of people have been able to access their favourite thing and where they live. We also established the Forest Dean Youth Association, didn't we, Bob? And again, that was in absence, complete absence of any support from the state in terms of funding, training, anything like that. We set that up as a collective so people could share resources between each other. And we've also managed to leverage in probably a couple of million now since we set that up. We provide support for groups. So when we do go out and we have these conversations, and we find that somebody's got a passion for, say, knitting, for an example, but they don't want to do it on their own, understandably. So we say, okay, why don't we set up a little group? Yeah, a couple of friends, there's lots of people that really like knitting. So they set it up, it develops, and it becomes a bit of a club, a bit of a regular thing. They then need to get some equipment to expand it. They need some more stuff to make it even, bigger, to match what they want. Not saying bigger is better, Martin will correct me on that if I do. Bigger is not better. But they need some equipment. So they apply to their local council. Their local council then says, can anyone guess? Where's your insurance? Where's your governing document? Yeah? Where's your this policy? Where's your that policy? And they say, oh, don't worry about it. Forget about it. And then these things dwindle off. They lose energy and they disappear. So one of the things that we do, apart from fighting against that, is we distribute funding ourselves. So we distribute funding on the basis of what matters to people, not how many KPIs they can hit. We couldn't care less about that. But also we'll act as a fiscal host. So that might be where somebody needs to access money and that funder isn't amenable to actually what they need. And we say, well, actually give it to us then. We've got all that in place and we'll just give it to them. It works, and it works really well.
Chris, we need to talk about how we got to there, don't we?
Yeah.
If we're going to share a technique. I used to chair Chris's chair.
Yeah, that's a good example.
And we used to do a double act. He was good cop, I was bad cop. Because I wasn't going to be there afterwards, he was.
Yeah.
So we went, for instance, we had pretty ropey relationships with both our district and county council, didn't we?
Yeah.
And we had a ropey relationship with the health people as well.
Yeah.
So I can remember at least 6 meetings between those where I went in and said, what you're doing is getting in the way of this community.
Yeah.
And upset them, and they went away and processed it. And then Chris went back to them, and he was the nice guy.
Yeah.
And how can we get around that? I think it's a really interesting strategy for change, because there was a fundamental change at the point at which Chris joined us with the RAF. The organisation was on its knees and it was being basically, what's the word? It was being bled dry by public services that only wanted it to do what they wanted.
Yeah.
And we changed that over a couple of years.
Yeah.
It's a phenomenal thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean this in the nicest possible way, Bob, but I call you the bowling ball. You'll come in and you'll knock the pins down, and then we work on putting them back up together. I totally agree. But you need that. You need somebody to say, this is the wrong way of doing things, but actually we'll help you make it right. It's hot, isn't it? That's okay. That's okay. But it's taken some time. It's taken some time, but not as much as you would think. What we also do as well is we do employee hosting. So that's another barrier that people face. So there's a place called Sedbury, right at the bottom of the Forest of Dean. Hasn't got a lot there. Yeah. They had one derelict old building that used to belong to a housing association, and a group of volunteers put in a proposal to take on this building and turn it into essentially a community centre, community space. And it got to the point where it was so successful that they actually needed a little bit of paid capacity into it to support some of the the more formal stuff. They said, look, we don't want to change our structure. We don't even know if this is going to work. We just want to try it out for a bit. So he said, well, don't change your structure. You don't care about that. You know, crack on with what you're good at. We'll take care of that. So we employed them on their behalf, and we supported them with the things that they might have needed along the way. But it works incredibly well. We now employ 3 people at the moment, soon to be 4, on behalf of other community projects. So all those sort of things, and I think a lot of it, what I would describe as is risk. It's about sharing risk. And for little small community groups, local government and all that, they see that as too risky to deal with. We certainly couldn't commission it. So actually, we make that happen for us. So at the moment, we're in the process of, hopefully, taking on all the children's centres in the Forest of Dean within our structure, because we're trusted, known, and devolving that to local community groups and organisations that we know are actually better at doing that than we are. The other thing that we do, and I don't think you can underestimate the importance of it, is networking, is brokerage. So, you know, we will be the ones who will connect these people who desperately need a community space to the people who own that community space. We will connect people up to a funder. We'll connect people up to other people who've got a shared interest. That brokering and that networking is so important. And in that process, we've built some incredibly powerful consortiums that are essentially delivering public services now in a much better bottom-up way. And then the last one for me, like I said, as well as working for VAF, nope, I'll try that again. I'm a councillor on Cinderford Town Council. Now, when I got involved in Cinderford Town Council 6 years ago, the only function of the Town Council was to keep taxes low. That's all they did. They did nothing else. One moment they had a clerk, and that was it. They kept taxes low. Even the idea of increasing the preset with inflation was like, oh, no, we don't do that, we don't do that. So I've gradually, and quite successfully, I'd say, got the council to recognise what they're good at and where they fit in communities, and what they can do to support communities without replacing them. It's really important. So, one of the amazing things that the Town Council can do is has fundraising power through taxation, and it can redistribute that, and it can do it in a way that isn't about KPIs, isn't about targeting people who are most deserving or least deserving or whatnot. They can do it in a way that matters to people. So what we did is we raised our taxes on the first year by 53%, I think. We lost a couple of councillors that year. To buy, this was our first one, a bank in the town centre, an old bank, and we bought it for 125 grand. Not a lot of money for a building in the town centre, significant building. And what we did with that is we did it up, shelled it out, and we've given it to a music charity for 25 years on a peppercorn lease. We've then done the same, an old church here, old Methodist church. It's derelict. We bought it, 250 grand, humongous building. It is absolutely enormous.
I can't imagine how big it is.
That's probably a quarter of it, all in all. Bought that for £250,000, and we handed it straight back to the community. It's run by a community partnership. This is the building that now we operate from at VAF. The council acquired that building from the NHS, the former health centre, and they've given it to us on a peppercorn rent for 25 years. So all these buildings that would otherwise be empty have been gifted back to the community, and the result is stuff like this. So again, when I came into the town council run events, and they were crap. They were rubbish, because they were run by the council. And so we said, well, actually, we could spend less money on running events if we just give that to local people to do it in a way that matters to them. And it worked so well. We now actually spend less money on events than we did before when the council did it. We also save a hell of a lot of time, and we get much, much better things in the image of what people actually bloody want. And to be honest, we do it in a way that actually takes a few risks every now and again. So the first time we ran Cinderford Music Festival, and I say we as a community, I'm also on that committee, but not in my council hat. First time we did that, we had to get a lorry stage donated to us. Now, if that happened to the town council, that wouldn't got past insurance or a risk assessment, no chance in a million years. But we got that in, and it was amazing. And we built from that, and it's got bigger and bigger every year. And we had the last one 2 weeks ago. And it's fantastic. And there's loads. We have Christmas events and all sorts of stuff. So I feel that is an example, albeit we're on a journey, of a council that knows when to get out of the way and when to support communities. It's brilliant. I love it. But that brings us into Martin. Yeah. Over to you.
I'm not sure. Can people read? Yeah? Oh, good. Okay. I could just say a couple of sentences to encapsulate everything I want to say, is that the only people who can build community are the people who live there. And you can only build community at the speed of trust. We want professionals on tap but not on top. Thank you. Any organisation is basically a network of conversations. And what we're doing and what you've done in the forest is change the conversations. From a defensive one or to maybe a proud one, but one that's not positive and forward-looking, a defeated one. I hate the word resilient, because resilient means we're not going to transform things. We are going to transform things. And putting up with bad things better is not the answer, but a good step forward. But basically, any organisation, it's just a series of conversations. And those conversations, we've got to switch to being positive ones. It's about thinking ones about possibility and being led by people who live in the streets that are in question. So our role is basically to connect people. And nobody is out there intentionally connecting people. Physically face to face, I mean. There's a lot of people doing it over the internet, but actually connecting people face to face is seen as not an important first step, but actually is absolutely crucial. Democracy doesn't work unless different types of people mix together and learn from each other and get to understand each other better. We want to bring forth kindness and sharing, and there's a big movement within local government now for relationship-based work. The idea that they have to now start thinking about relationships is quite ridiculous. But kindness is now the next, I think, is following in very clearly. It's not affecting people's change, but actually people appreciating from the business sector that actually kindness with staff is really effective productivity, affects productivity. And what we want is collective acts of caring. So much caring now. Am I speaking too fast? I suddenly realised I just suddenly realised. Collective acts of caring are going out of phase. Most caring is, and services are delivered one-to-one, individuals from services, and collective acts are seen as inferior in some way, where actually we know that for real healing and comfort and things to actually change, the best support comes from families, friends, neighbours, the local community and the local neighbourhood, and professionals sitting in with them. The final point here is about radical transformation. We all say we want radical transformation, but we ain't going to get it unless we set into motion things we can't control. And the whole system is to make sure you don't put anything that you can't control into motion. So there's a long way to go to bring people, but the change, I believe, comes from neighbourhoods. All the new ideas are born out of a few group of people, like-minded people, who care about the same thing, realising that there are other people around who care about that thing, and then they can actually take some action. We go on. And I try to, community development's a very diverse area of work, and it ranges from social activists and I mean, I've been involved with people with political action, for a lot of political action. I trained in America in community organising. I was telling the other group that Barack Obama was training there at the same time. He was in Chicago. I was in Houston. I never met him, but he says that's where he got his real education, not at Harvard, but on the streets of Chicago. And that's where he learnt all about politics. And I did the same training. And what I tried to find, I came back here, and it was so many different voices and so many different groups you were talking to, that I tried to find something that everybody could come behind and agree upon. A lot of people in social action are quite angry people. They want change and they want it now, and they're a bit blind to any other ideology that clashes with them. I work for an organisation called Radix, so I really encourage people to support, which is bringing politicians together to listen to each other, because politicians never listen to each other. It's Radix, so sign up. But I tried to get a single statement, and it came from the most unlikely source, a very good friend of mine, David Zigman, who's a psychiatrist, and he was a family doctor in South London for 30 years, and he refused to go start doing his practice online. And he said, no, my time is spent with the attention I give to my patients, and they closed him down. The hearing that they held a hearing on it, and the panel apologised because he was right. Lining a family, it was a big family of the general practice, but he wasn't going to go on courses to teach him stuff from people who had never actually done it, and he wasn't going to spend his time doing records, and they shut him down. But he's a campaigner now. But David came out with a statement once, and I thought, well, that's what we can all get behind because it applies to all of us. What we want is a safe, secure, stable and satisfying sense of self amongst others for everyone. And we all need it, to be safe and satisfied in a sense of self amongst others. And that'll do. If we get anywhere on that track, getting people towards that, that'll be fine. We're a long way from it. We work at a neighbourhood level and stay at a neighbourhood level and don't take on it. And often I advise community builders when they're working to even go down to the street and stay with the street for a year or two. But getting bigger than neighbourhoods is just too big. There's different skills. To be emotionally present. We're not professionals who project themselves as people who know the answers and are perfectly rounded human beings who have wonderful families at home and all the rest of it. We are emotionally present and be real to people. Because if you want them to build trust amongst each other, they've got to trust you. And trust comes from an emotional exchange from the heart, person to person. To be available. Well, I insist I'd spend most of my time mentoring community builders, face-to-face workers, because I got fed up with talking with rooms full of people from the statutory sector and who weren't going to change. Or not. They often came up and said, that's great stuff, we want to do it in our own community, but we can't do it at work because of this, and all reasons. They haven't got the freedom to actually just do what they want to do. And I just prefer to work with frontline younger people, actually. I concentrate on working with younger people who give me energy, and then I can give them energy back. It keeps me going, keeps me healthy. But to be available means being out in the streets. 75% of their time is spent outside, on the streets. I mean, in the winter there's pubs and clubs and cafes and things like that, but outside doing. And it's amazing the response and from people and what we've achieved. We started off, we were funded, this is Torbay, one of the many areas I work in. It was funded by the lottery. They gave us 6 million for 6 years. And the council were outraged. And they said, what are these people doing, walking around the streets talking with people? This is a shocking waste of money. We're now 7 years down the line. The council are funding the entire project now. It's 380,000 a year. No problem at all. They've understood that what we were doing actually brings about change and has impact on all sorts of very, anxiety, depression, things that are costing the state lots of money in the long term. We're actually nipping in the bud. To be available, so to be out there and to be responsive, not responsible for. None of the community builders are responsible for anybody. We're not there fixing people, telling people how they should live their lives, but we're responsive to them immediately, and that's absolutely crucial. We make it as much fun as we can, and one of John McKnight's, the guy who started all this ABCD phrases, he said, if you get home in the evening and you haven't contributed to the development of a culture of community, you've been distracted again. And we get distracted and we go off and we're forming things, very worthwhile things. But actually, it's all about a culture of community and contributing to that in any way that you can, and everybody contributing to it. And is it Brenda? I've forgotten.
Browne.
Browne. Browne. She writes about vulnerability, something that I think is completely misunderstood. It's a very good thing to be vulnerable and open. But it's seen as where you talk about vulnerable people as some weaker people or less than people. It takes strength and courage to be vulnerable. Be you, be seen, belong, I think is a lovely catch-all phrase. Okay. This is, I worked with Cormac Russell and Nurture Development for quite a few years, and one of Cormac's quotes about what we're all about is focus on what's strong and what's possible and what works, not on what's wrong or what's missing, I would add to that. So much of it is people go into poorer communities and look for all the problems, the needs, the deficiencies, and then bring in outside people to compensate for them. That's not what we do. We look for the strengths, find those strengths, talk to people, find out what they care enough about to do something about, connect them with other people who feel the same, and then step back and let those strengths do the healing, do the change, bring about the change. So we go walk about, and we ask questions. We don't come up with answers for people. There are a lot of systems set up by the local authorities are coming up with all these very articulated, wonderful answers. I mean, they're coming up with wonderful words. Sustainability. Still don't understand what sustainability is, but there's a new one every 2 or 3 years. But what we're doing is just asking questions, and then listening to the answers and asking another question, and let people come up with their own answers. Let people make their mistakes. Step back. Let them be out there, and not do it for them. We're looking for possibilities, and we're always looking out for potential. It's one of the very characteristics of every human being is they can't resist actually helping someone else achieve something and to realise their potential. You see it in all walks of life and all ages. If you can do something to help somebody else, you do it. It makes you feel good, makes them obviously helps them. We had a evaluation. We've had several evaluations actually of a lot of the work that we've done, formal evaluations by universities and academics, and clearly out comes the two factors that they think are key to our success is understanding the neighbourhood. Every neighbourhood is completely different. Every street is completely different. Every individual is unique, just like everybody else. It's one of Margaret Wheatley's favourite phrases, that every individual is unique, just like everybody else. It's one of those mind benders. You can't. So getting to understand the neighbourhood is absolutely key, and then remaining flexible. That we're completely flexible. We don't know what we're going to do from one day to the next. I mean, we know what we're not going to do, and we know what we want the system to stop doing, do no more harm. But what we don't do is can't predict what's going to happen. And it help building the community from the inside out, as I said earlier. It's only the people who live there can actually change things on the long. ABCD, strength-based community development, is based on the work, again, I said, of John McKnight. He when he came in from Chicago to the university, he got a job as a professor at Chicago University. He had all these people talking about the areas which he'd worked, and he didn't recognise it at all. They were talking about apathy and problems and addictions and negative, terrible stories, all true, but actually had no element of truth as far as John was concerned about actually all the change that people do still self-organise. They still do come together. It just doesn't get any press or any promotion. And he went around America, well, he got 18 of his colleagues to go around America collecting stories of times when people did things together to make life better for those around them. And he collected them. There's about 3,000 in a book called The Green Book. But in each of those stories, he recognised there were 6 assets come to play at some point in the story. People would utilise the assets. The first being the talents, gifts, skills of the people themselves, and the good nature and the kindness, all the best of it. Their knowledge, their local knowledge. The passions and interests of local residents that give them energy for change. The networks and connections in a community, including friendships and neighbourhoods. The effective local community and voluntary organisations, the self-help groups. All these are assets that can be tapped into. And one of the failings that we have in this country, we tend to work in isolation. We solve problems in isolation. We campaign for isolated causes. People take on interest in a faith group, but they don't talk to the sports group down the road. But we bring those people together, and you've got an amazing group of really positive people who weren't happy enough with what was going on, so they set up their own groups. And there's the public and private and third sector organisations, the corporations. I've brought time banking to this country, and we used to use all the local companies and local businesses to give people as thank yous to people for the time that they contributed and their time credits. Then they could buy a free haircut or go to cinema tickets and all the rest of it. So they can be utilised. But these are all assets that are can be used. The unused resources, local physical resources, that are often about in any community. And we were talking the other day of 17 empty shops in Cinderford.
Yeah, there is.
I mean, it's amazing resources are just there but silly legislations are holding us back on that thing. And the final one of the stories, which I started with, those stories of when people did come together to change. These are all assets that can be used, and at some point to draw on them all. At the moment, we seem to have a point to say you have a so-called problem like loneliness or isolation. So some very well-meaning dynamic young group get together, put in an application, get funding, social money to employ 3 or 4 people to combat loneliness in this area. But what can they do? I mean, only people who can combat loneliness are the people living in the street with that person or in the next street, or some people who've got affinity groups, the same sort of interests. Anyway, so that's and I think I went over the top a bit of this last time, but I do think we've got to keep things slow, keep things local, and keep things small. This whole business thinking has come into local government thinking about scaling up. You're always told to scale up.
Yeah.
I used to scale up time banking to get more money. You'd scale up and quote how many thousands of people. But actually, the smaller you are, the tighter you are, the more connected you are, the stronger you are. And keep that, and then network that with another group that's together and connected and strong. If you start spreading stuff, so some of the action groups over the internet, I mean, what change do they really bring about? I don't know. It's good for the conversations. I think the conversations can be had, but actually to start building the trust, you've got to have face-to-face experience of working and doing things together. And there's a quote from Jody Kretzmann. Jody was the guy he died in January actually, but for those of us involved in community development, he will really be the real hero. He was the heart of ABCD.
The workhorse.
And the workhorse, yes, yeah. What a lovely, lovely man. But he said ABCD practitioners, that's community builders, are defenders of the small. The smaller we remain in practice in what we do, the more we are able to focus on the local, and the more powerful the movement is. And absolutely true. And then you bring together a movement of movements. We're trying to build these massive organisations that just, have formal meetings, and goodness, is not the way. That picture actually is very interesting. You can't see that. This was in Croydon. I was involved there after the riots, and spontaneously the press were just blaming the young people and they set fire to a few shops and really negative nonsense. Thousands of local people came out with their brooms and cleaned up the place themselves. Didn't ask for permission for anybody to do it, and they started organising and doing loads of events. We got involved with them for young people, so that people didn't feel that they were being demonised in the press, the national press. The young people looting and all this sort of stuff. But that was a very emotional picture for me, because they just came out and just got on with it. And nobody didn't ask for permission for anybody. And this is this last slide. The main drivers for social change, out of all the there are books and books and books written on it, but I've sort of pulled out these 3 things that I think are absolutely the main drivers that get people going. Hope in itself, but HOPE, helping other possibilities emerge. We don't know what they're going to be, but as long as we're helping other possibilities to what's obviously not working now. The system is broken, community is being damaged. A lot of harm is being done, unconsciously. But so helping other possibilities emerge and letting people control it and be in charge of that and let them go. Care is absolutely fundamental to everything we do, and it's about discovering what people really care about enough to act upon. And once you get that, it's such a powerful force for change that you get. And then they realise other people feel the same.
It's worth mentioning to people, Martin, there's a book and there's a video.
Right.
And there's basically, I think the book is called When People Care Enough to Act.
Yes, yes.
And it's published by,
I don't know.
who is it in the States?
I don't know.
Well, I was thinking about it. But it's Mike Green.
Mike Green, I was going to say, yeah.
And was the guy that died?
Or Jodie.
No, out in, it's a community organiser out in Savannah.
I don't know.
No, John.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can circulate a video we've just done of Torbay if people would like to see that as well. That's great. It's a handmade video of what 7 years work in community and what you can achieve. And it's done by the local people themselves and the community builders.
Henry Moore.
Oh yes, I'm slow. Yeah. So discovering what people really care about, and then, as we all know, it's all about relationships. And it's about comfort and solidarity, the two words I think for me resonate with the concept of relationships. Bringing comfort and sense of solidarity. Our mental health depends on us, on a sense of solidarity. It's such an underrated thing that actually provides so much real relationships and not treatment. We're not in the fixing people and treating them for problems or deficiencies. That's